today is all about magic adventures in scenic art. Our presenter today is Katherine Ross, who is sitting here, and in the interest of full disclosure, she is my wife. So we've had this conversation, what we're going to talk about, I don't know, a million times every day when we come home from work, because I do the same thing that Katherine does. So I think we're just going to launch into it. It's going to be an interview format today, so it's going to be a conversation between Katherine and myself, and you'll get to, I think, learn an awful lot about Katherine and scenic art and what she does and what I do, and I think I'll stop talking and start asking questions. And we have a lovely list of questions right here to keep us on track and organized. And the very first one is to ask Katherine a little bit about her background.
Well, I was born in Iowa City, Iowa, when my father was in graduate school in printmaking at the University of Iowa. We moved south, and my parents taught. My father taught at Auburn University in the art department, and my mother taught at Tuskegee Institute, teaching in art there.
So
my mom,
both your parents are artists.
So both my parents are artists. Mm-hmm. So I come from an art background. My mother's a portrait painter, and my father's a printmaker. So I always grew up thinking that's what we do. We're artists, and I did that. And I always was determined to make my living with my art. So.
And what is your education? What did you do to get to that?
So I went to undergraduate at the University of Iowa, and I was in the art department. I have a BFA in fine art from there, and I had a master in, a BFA in ceramics, and I was studying art history, and I was also interested in German literature and German. So I had a wide range of interests at that time. And then I went to graduate school at Northwestern in theatrical design.
But there was what happened in Iowa?
Oh, in my last year at Iowa, I had one more entry-level class to take in art, and I took a intro to theatrical design class. And I had been toying with the idea of coming up with my own degree in something that would tie all these things that I was interested in together. And what I found was that theatrical design really tied that all together, so that each play gave me a research project. And I could look at history, politics, science from the era in which the play was written, art history, and then I had a creative project. I had a task. I found it to be a really nice, concise way of putting all my interests together. And my teacher for that class was Terry McClellan, who I'm still in touch with, and he said, "You should do this." So I did.
So you did. So then from Iowa, it was Northwestern for graduate school,
right,
and an MFA in theatrical design with a concentration in scenic design. So you are a scenic designer.
I'm a scenic designer.
In addition to being a scenic artist. So maybe we should, at this point, what's the difference between a scenic designer and a scenic artist, and sort of what is a scenic, what are both of them? Because they're related, and certainly in the world we inhabit, it's a very close relationship.
A scenic artist takes direction really from the scenic designer. So the scenic designer is the one who decides what the environment is going to be like through conversation with the director. So the director is really the driver of that initial idea and why we're doing this play, et cetera, et cetera. But then the designer takes that and turns it into a three-dimensional environment in which the play takes place. The scenic designer is responsible for creating design draftings and drawings and paint elevations in scale for all the craftspeople to work from. They give them to the technical director, and they give them to the technical director will do the technical draftings of how it's going to be built, and then they will give those draftings to the carpentry shop, and the designer gives the half-inch scale renderings to the Chargeman scenic artist, and the scenic artist is then responsible for creating them full scale from those drawings and paintings.
Okay, so there's very much sort of a hierarchy of how all this works. You have a director, then you have designers, and then under each designer there's an entire world of craftspeople who execute their vision, and the scenic artist exists in this interesting place with the designer and the people producing all the craftsmen in the shop, but they also have a relationship directly with the scenic designer. So you left Northwestern with a design degree.
Right.
And what did you do? I mean, there was a little bit of time after graduate school before you started painting full time.
Right.
And then what was the path to painting full time, and why painting?
Right. I was always interested in painting because I did come from the art background and I enjoyed painting. And I did actually work at Northwestern for a while as the scenic artist for the students. So I was a staff scenic artist who supported the student productions and helped the student artists paint their shows. And then I worked sometimes, I would work sometimes with, at Becker Studio, and I would paint there. That's a union shop, and I would get called. I was on the list. They have like an A, B, and C list, so there would be the scenic artists, and then there would be other extra people in the union who could probably do it okay, and then there would be non-union people who were vouched for by a couple of union members. And so I got to paint more and more frequently at Becker Studio, and then eventually I did take the union exam and became a union scenic artist. The nice thing about being a scenic artist is it's an hourly paid position. A scenic designer is a fee, so you can put in a gazillion hours, which you will, and your hourly rate plummets. So it's nice to get an hourly rate. So it was a good way to make money.
So the choice to work both as a scenic designer or scenic artist helps essentially pay the rent. It can be a very steady income. And Katherine mentioned union membership. We're both members of United Scenic Artists, Local 829, which is part of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. So if you think, you go to the theater and they're the stage hands, we're in the same union as them, but we're responsible for designing and painting scenery. That's our deal. And right. What's great for us is because we're both freelance,
right.
We don't work.
But all our employers pay into our pension and welfare plans.
So it allows us to move from an employer to employer. We worked at multiple places, and we get our benefits. We get health insurance, we get a pension, we get job protections, but that's portable with us because we work. I mean, there have been years where, I don't know, there have been 15 or 20 W-2s for us at tax season.
Yeah.
So it's a way for us to move amongst employers.
Yeah.
So you...
I have a lot of feedback.
Scenic designer, scenic artist, those sort of were complementary in ways for you and I to make a living. And I think we'll start with some pictures, but this idea of, did you leave Northwestern as a fully formed scenic artist? You talked a little bit about moving into it, but is it something that...
The nice thing about working at Becker Studio is Becker Studio was built in the teens. It's down in at like California and Taylor Street, and it was an old building built to be a vaudeville scene shop. And so I worked with Brian Becker, and his grandfather built it. And I, so is this the picture?
Yeah. So
all right. So this is not Becker Studio. I don't know if there are photos of Becker Studio, but this is very similar. This is a paint frame, and so I learned how to paint on a paint frame. That's one giant frame. The ones at Becker's were about 25 by 50 feet, and so you tack up your muslin onto the frame, and then it goes down into a slot. I think the next picture shows a good slot. So there's, right where he's standing, there's a slot, and it's about 24 feet deep by 1.5 feet wide and 50 feet or whatever the frame length is. And so the scenic artist stands on the second floor, and the paint frame is on a pulley system, and it goes up and down as you need it. So you can always paint kind of at, right here, right in front of you with your hands, and that's nice. But there is a 24-foot drop right in front of you, and so you're standing on the edge of this little cliff all the time, and you don't really think about it, but Maggie once fell into it. She caught herself on her elbows.
So at Becker's, was that part of your education then for learning to be a scenic artist?
Yeah, we did a lot of drops there, and it was, so historically, scenic art is really all couched in the terminology and the art of the Baroque period, which is opera and theater kind of at its highest form. And at that point in time, there was no idea of a scenic artist or a scenic designer. There really was just scenery, and you would just make it. And the technology since then over the centuries has changed so that there have become more and more areas of expertise. Initially, and the way Brian Becker's grandfather would do it is he would go downtown and talk to the producer at a vaudeville theater, and they would talk about the kind of show they wanted to make, and he would go back to the shop and he would paint up some renderings or some paint elevations, and he would bring them back down to the producer and show them, and they would say, sure, that looks great, and then they would paint them in the shop, and then they would deliver them. And this would not take very long. Becker's initially had about, the paint floor was maybe 20 feet wide between paint frames. So there was one paint frame on one wall and another paint frame on the other wall, and it had about 6 paint frames in between. So it was just slot after slot of paint frames, and they would do all wing and drop scenery, old style, and just beautifully painted, just gorgeous. Over the years, scenery became more three-dimensional and more built, and so they put in a floor and got rid of half of the, or 4 of the paint frames, and just left the 2 outside ones, and developed the carpentry shop in the kind of garden apartment level. And so he would do more built scenery. The shop was just fascinating because it had trap doors in it all over the place. They would open up the floor, and you could bring up flats that are scenery. So it's a wooden frame with a covering, a muslin covering on it, and then you would attach those to the paint frame, and you could paint them. And then there would be bigger holes that you could open up, and there would be a hoist, and you could bring up more three-dimensional pieces. There, up on the 3rd floor, was a whole sewing room, and you would sew all the drops up there, and then there was a hoist that would drop them all down to the paint floor. It was just really well organized for that kind of scenery. It was really a wonderful place to work and to learn. And one of the things we got to do was Becker's had been responsible for a lot of the Masonic drops that had been painted in the Midwest, and so they would also come back to us, and so we would get old Masonic drops, and we would tack them up on one frame, and then we would produce from them a new one, so we would have to recreate one. So it was a great way to learn from the old painters, because we would have to copy their work. So that was really pretty cool.
I think there were also some painters who had been working for a while who you had the opportunity to work with. So
yeah, there were a few, just not very many.
So the opportunity to learn there. And I think let's take a minute and talk about exactly how a scenic artist works. I mean, it's kind of an open-ended question, and maybe we can use this as sort of an example starting point
Okay,
for
so
the conversation.
I talked about the set designer gives you a rendering, so it's in scale. So this is a rendering of the drop that was our title slide.
Right, so if you look right there, that's Catherine's finger.
Oh,
So that gives you an idea of how big this is. It really is
it's about this big.
about the size of this piece of paper,
Right.
and that is what the designer wants the finished piece of scenery to look like.
This is a guide to what the designer wants. It's not exactly what they want, so there's a phone call and a conversation, if you're lucky, or it's, you know, 2 people away from actually talking to the designer. It's always nice to actually talk to the designer and not just like the project manager or somebody who doesn't know terminology. This doesn't have a water stain on it, and he requested a water stain. And
What show was this for?
this was for Tootsie downtown. So this is so that's a Broadway
Pre-Broadway,
Broadway.
that shows will come to Chicago and they'll do their pre-Broadway. Their pre-Broadway tryout, and that's sort of the old terminology for it, but they call it, they do production here. So they will come in, the show will get, everything's built, shipped here, usually it's built in New York, shipped here, installed in the theater, they work everything out, they do rehearsals, they do a preview and a short run here, then it all gets taken out of the theater and shipped back to New York for the actual Broadway run, opening and run, but they refer to it as production here in Chicago.
So they'll decide they want some different piece of scenery or they want things changed, and so then they hire local shops to do that kind of work. And then I also was hired to go downtown and do some touch-up or changes on some of the scenery that was there.
So this is the elevation for the drop, and then
So then the first thing you do is you take all those measurements and you lay them out on the floor and you figure out. So now we're painting on the floor, which is the continental method. So really there aren't very many paint frames. I don't think there are any in the city anymore that go up and down into.
WGN still has one, but you can't actually get to it because
There's too much junk in
junk
front.
piled in the.
But
And one of the differences, a lot of it has to do with real estate.
Yeah.
There was more room available in this country than in
at the time.
than older European shops had, and they needed to be efficient and have conserve space. And this is America. We have a lot of square footage.
Yes. Well, you're more likely to be able to move into a shop now as opposed to build a shop.
Right.
And you're more likely to find one that has floor space than a paint frame. So anyhow, it's stapled down on the floor. We measure it and staple it out to the scale that were requested, and then take measurements. And I think in that slide, you can see there are snap lines. So I snapped lines from the top to the bottom along the lines that I had drawn on the rendering, which is covered in plastic. I didn't draw on the actual rendering. And then I've cartooned. We do the drawing stage is called cartooning, and you draw in charcoal.
So
some
these
of the
are the
shapes that you
cartoon
want.
lines here.
Yeah. And so then the next slide is all the shadow areas so that I can figure out where I am while I'm painting on the drop. And next one is basted in with, I probably mixed like 3 or 4 colors of this sort of peachy color to try and develop the folds. And there's some texture and starting to develop the fringe at the bottom. And getting the shadows in a fringy sort of way.
And then
There's the highlights of the fringe.
And
then
right
there's the
there.
water stain. So I added that in, and I had done a sample, and I talked to the designer about exactly where he wanted it, and he said, well, less tall, more horizontal than I had done in the sample. And so I did that, and then we rolled it up, and it sat there for a long time. And then it finally went to the show, and
It's like do you remember what house?
I don't.
The Schubert.
I really
we don't
can't
even
remember.
know the names of the houses anymore because they've all
Because they
turned
keep
into named
changing.
after banks.
Right.
If you go down to any of the theaters downtown, they're
Or
all
cars.
bank names. So I don't know. I called it the Schubert, the Oriental, and no one else.
Nobody knows what it is.
So,
right. So,
but it was one of the big houses downtown.
so they unrolled it, and they called the shop, and they said, "There's a problem." What's the problem? There's a water stain on the drop. Which is very satisfying because they were all in the business and they should have known better, but they didn't. Fooled ya. So that's the magic that we do. So we make these things that are two-dimensional look realistic. Right. And I did get to see the show, and it was really pretty. I wish I had a photo of it on set.
So there's kind of a basic process that you follow with doing the drops. There's a roadmap that we have in the back of our heads that we use.
There's 3 rules that I have, and they are, and you use them if they apply. They are top to bottom. So if it's up high, you paint the top part first so that you clean up your drips as you go. Background to foreground. If you're doing scenery, you want to do the sky and then your distant mountains and then your foreground, et cetera, until you get to the detail. And the last one is light to dark. So you can cover dark colors cover light colors more easily with dark colors. So then you just look at your problem and you go, which of these rules do I get to use?
The other thing is, as you looked at this sequence for this drop, it wasn't painting it to completion in a corner and working all the way out. Right. One of the things you sort of keep in the back of your mind is, what if they walked in at the end of the day today and said you're out of time? And if you had only done this corner, it would be horrible. If you had done everything to a stage, it might still look horrible, but at least it's complete.
A cohesive whole.
And so, and then one more shot here.
I just wanted to point out that this is really pretty physical work. So we're doing a wet glaze on top of a wet blend that we had done before. So the wet blend is all the undercolors on this brick wall. The brick is actually from a company called Pulp Art, and they make the brick out of paper, pulp, and so it's really nice. It's kind of new.
And it's dimensional.
Yeah. So it's dimensional, so you get to use the dimension to your advantage, and we're using gravity to help us out with that. And so we did an opaque, colorful wet blend before, and now we're doing glazes, and we're going to make it all look like brick. And there's one that's done up at the top.
Right. So it is work. It's physical labor.
It is.
It's interesting because it exists both in the world of being an artist and in the world of
being a laborer. Yeah.
So the next thing, we're going to see if this works, is we've talked about sort of in a static way what is painting a drop, and we're going to try this. This was, 15 years ago maybe.
A long time ago.
This is, I set up a camera and did a time lapse of painting a drop, and this is over the course. This is folding up the old drop, the previous drop that was on the floor, and this is over the course of maybe a week and a half.
Yeah, not a week.
So
this was Tim was the chargeman at this shop, Hawkeye Scenic Studios, and so the first thing we do is we sweep, and then we get the muslin.
And this is about probably 30 by 60.
Yeah.
For Drury Lane, Oakbrook.
Drury Lane, Oakbrook. I think it was
Fiddler on the Roof. Staple it to the floor. Talk on the phone for a while.
Yes, that's always important. Staple, staple, staple. And then you prime it.
So you take the raw muslin and you put a coat of essentially white. It's not real thick, but it fills the weave and stretches the fabric nice and tight. Because when you get fabric wet, it shrinks.
It's a power like gravity. I've seen it pull wood up off the floor. And now you cartoon. So now the rendering we're holding in our hands is gridded off in like 2-foot squares. And so we're drawing this size to a 2-foot square on the ground.
And now we're going to start putting some paint on.
So we're doing what? Top and background very good.
We're following our own rules.
Right. This was early digital camera.
Yes.
Very pixelated.
And this, we're probably doing this in the course of a couple of hours.
Yeah. And those are like 6-inch brushes on bamboo poles.
So again, it's art, but it's also, it's work. And you can see right here is where the village is going to be. So you can see our sky. We're stopping it just into those, so you get a sense of it being behind of that foreground, background Catherine talked about. Now another painter's come along.
Putting in some other colors.
Karen is starting to put in some more work on the sky.
So we work together too. So it's not just one artist doing this. So you have to get yourselves all on the same page. You can't be doing your idea of what this should look like.
More sky, more sky. It's a lot of square footage to make it look nice. And then let's see.
It looks like Karen was working by herself.
Yeah, she was doing a lot that day on her own. Because other people are painting the rest of the show on the rest of the, and right there is called a Hudson spray.
And we toned it all.
And then obviously I missed a day. Because now Catherine's in, she's doing the last bits on the sky right down at the top of the village. And then it's interesting, you can watch and you see that Katherine and Karen a lot of times will stop and talk to each other about what they're doing. And it's that having that discussion about what's our next step. And how does this look to you? Oh, I think you should do such and such. I come along occasionally and say, are you done yet?
Because
I was the charge painter. And you can just, it's building up layers and it's building up the structure. And there, we missed a day somewhere in there, more of it. So, and again, it's Karen just concentrating on it. And you can see she's got the elevation in her hand. So you're looking at it and you're looking at the drop constantly.
And she's got about 6 buckets of.
Yeah, so those are all the colors she's working out of.
Sometimes we carry the buckets around with us too.
And we're getting close now.
It's starting to look like something.
And you can see she's putting in some of the darker shadowing and detailing. Okay, got to be finishing soon. It's got to get on the truck. And now there's a big Hudson spray to tone the sky and bring everything together. More detailing. I mean, there's a lot of time spent on doing this. And any moment now, the designer should come in. Because they're going to come in and they look at the work and see what they think. And they're going to have notes. And you'll see they have this particular designer would have conversation right there. That's the designer in the orange shirt.
Now we went up on the ladder to look at it. Now there's Rich,
that's
the shop owner. And
he's,
Tim is the chargeman.
There's lots of conversation about what to do.
And now they're talking to me about stuff.
And then Katherine takes the notes that were given, and she finishes up. So one of the things I think you can talk a little bit about this as this is finishing up is this was painted at a commercial scenery supplier. They're there to make money.
So it's your job to please the artist, the designer, but you also have to do it as fast as possible so that you make money for the employer because you want to work again. So it's the scenic artist can be in a real kind of tight position. So there's always this tension of how fast can I do this? Can I break this down into fewer steps? And how can I make this make money for the boss? Because you don't want them to go out of business.
The way that drop would have been priced is, I would have looked at it, I would have imagined how long it was going to take to paint it. That would be the bid. The client says, yeah, I'll pay that much for it. And then we, the painters, have to execute it in the given
Those hours.
time. And labor is priced hourly for the cost of the employee, the cost of overhead for the shop, and hopefully some profit for the shop owner, for the company to make. So when you go over on your time, somebody's not making money. So there is this tension of how do we produce the art that the designer wants and that we feel we want it to have.
Yeah, we want to be satisfied and feel like we've done a good job.
But also make money for everyone who wants to make money, or if you're in a non-commercial venue, make sure the theater doesn't go under because you spent too much time producing the scenery. So it's a tension we deal with all the time. So let's see what's next on our hit parade here. Other things you've been working on, because that was just sort of an introduction to what we do. And then
well, here's another drop. This is for the Goodman Theater, and this is the paint shop at the Goodman. And this is me and Donna Slager working on the show curtain for Music Man. If any of you saw it, that was it. And then
I'm going to stop you for just a minute here. If you look around the top here, are all pieces that the charge painter at the Goodman has painted over the last 30 or 40 years. And the really nice ones that he likes, he saves them from the show and he hangs them up. And that, it's really hard to see in this photo, but Sunday in the Park with George, the Grand Jacques, the Seurat, right there is the reproduction that he did, which is absolutely stunning, and it's hanging up. So this is some of the kind of stuff that he does, or that the shows have done. But this is Katherine and Donna painting the show curtain for Music Man.
And then we worked with bamboo poles, and we did all that lettering, standing up.
Because if you're
got
down on your hands and knees and crawled around all day long,
you'll never finish.
For 5 days a week, for 40 weeks a year, for 30 years, your body would be broken.
Right.
So how do you do the art and not kill yourself?
And here it is in the theater. It's a little bit fuzzy. Okay.
So, and this is running right now down at the Goodman.
So here's what I was doing yesterday. So this is this is commercial shop, Chicago Scenic Studios, and I'm just making samples of different textures for a client. This is like there are 3 1-foot squares of each thing. So that's like a little road with a line and a grass sponge, subway tile, pavers, sandstone. And then go to the next one, it shows it from the other side. Oh, and sand for a beach. So there's the sandstone. So those all have the highlights on the right side, so they make more sense now. So then I have process. This took me about 2 hours yesterday. So I started with these 3 squares that are based, the sandstone base. And then, whoops, go fast. All right, so then I did...
So the 3 squares based in with the color.
Mm-hmm. And then I did a rag roll with a color.
And a rag roll means you literally take a rag, and you can see there's the rag right there, and you flop it around.
So I did have a layout of approximately where the stones were, and so I was working in the center. And then I did something that was really hot highlight, and then I did a glaze to kind of pull them together. And I painted in the mortar, which actually stands proud of the stones in the sample. And then just keep tying them together with different glazes, putting in shadows underneath the mortar so it is standing out. And then there they are done.
So, And so this is all flat, but that's all shadow to make it dimensional.
And so I'm working up samples for the client to look at and say they like it or not, or what they would like different. And then also I'm writing down recipes for colors that I mix, and I'm writing down processes for other painters to do this, because I probably won't be doing it.
And you're also thinking about, again, is that whole idea of efficiency. How do we get to this arty bit as quickly as possible?
So the other thing I did was I painted a ghost sign for the Chicago Bears at Hallis Hall. That was fun. So a ghost sign is a sign that's been on a wall for years and years, and so it's supposed to look like one of those, old painted sign. Here's Tim.
Here I am.
So we also at Chicago Scenic, they did all these installations for the Mascot Hall of Fame in Hammond?
Whiting, Indiana. So they just opened the Mascot Hall of Fame in Whiting, Indiana. So it's actually kind of fun. So did a bunch of things, and I don't remember his name. All these characters have names. Slider. In the Cleveland Indians mascot.
So here's a whole bunch of them outside.
And that's what it looks like.
So we painted all of those.
So one of the things, I mean, the title of this talk is Magical Adventures in Scenic Art, and you wanted to talk about...
Well, some of the things that are magical are fooling people, but also getting them in on it sometimes is really nice. So, the fooling people to think that this is really stone or this is really fabric drape is really fun. But this was a really nice project that we did for Marshall Fields. So I had my own company, which was named Kink, K Incorporated, for Katherine and Karen. And so we closed several years ago, but we worked a lot with Marshall Fields. And one of the things that they asked us to do was a photo op for the book launch for Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince when it was coming out. So I got a copy of the book and was asked to create the front of the book as a photo op. So we divided it up into pieces. So here is Dumbledore.
And this is painted flat, so again, there is no actual physical dimension to this. It's all...
but it's a cutout.
But it's a cutout.
So it has a shape.
Right. It has
and
an exterior shape.
Here's the background of the book. And then, we don't have just the thing, the pensive. But anyhow, so here they are together. And what we wanted was this, since the lighting is coming up from inside this pensive there, and there's mist coming off of it, and we wanted to be able to give that effect. So what we did was we used something like a Pillon or some kind of stuffing for pillows and put it around the top rim of that urn, and then had some lighting. And then here's Karen. and it worked really well. So the lighting is coming up from below, so it copies the lighting that's on Dumbledore's face. And then the next picture is the actual photo op. And so you could have your picture taken, and all the kids would come, and they had costumes for them to put on, and they could get their picture taken as though they were on the cover of the book. And I think what's nice about this, and what I really liked about the way Marshall Fields worked and thought, was that was getting you in on it. So I feel, to my mind, it is a million times better than standing in front of a green screen where you get to choose the background that you're in. That this is something that you're really in on the joke, and you understand how it was made. But when you get the photograph, go back to the one with Karen, you can't tell, It looks like you're actually in there. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really cool. So that is what I think about as being magical. Another one that we did for Marshall Fields was, I don't know if you remember the Sweet Home Chicago pieces. So this was our proposal for a window at Marshall Fields. They asked us to design it in conjunction with Nahigian Brothers carpeting, so we used carpets. But our idea was, well, what they wanted was to have the glass taken out and have people be able to walk up inside the window, which is really wonderful. And this was the one that had suites of furniture. So the furniture was really fairly ugly. Here, you can go to the next one. So here's the proposal inside the window at Marshall Fields, and we were having a ramp go up in there. So this is just a rendering, but it is in scale. And so then the next picture, we have it mocked up in the shop. And so we have walls that go back and a ceiling that goes up. And then you can see the fiberglass furniture is on the platform. And we're working from a projection of that rendering that is being projected onto all of those surfaces. And so then we paint exactly what falls on those surfaces, and then you extrapolate what happens on the horizontal surfaces, so that when you stood at a certain point, so here it is completed, if you stand right there, everything flattens out, and so you have two different worlds that you're inhabiting at the same time. And so that's me and Karen, and so it was like a Persian miniature. You're kind of floating in this environment, and it was very satisfying. I mean, I really loved doing that.
So you can see that is.
So you can see the ottoman.
The ottoman there. That's a chair. And that's the chair.
There's a TV set.
There's a TV set back there.
There's a lamp right here, yeah.
Yeah. That are dimensional, but it all just falls back and forth.
So if you walk around it, it would fall apart, and then when you get to the right spot, it all comes together, and then it would fall apart again. It was really fun. You want to talk about anything else?
No, I think one of the things that you've enjoyed lately about being a scenic artist is
I get to actually go on three-dimensional adventures. I've been sent to foreign lands, which has been really exciting for me. So we did, this is through Chicago Scenic Studios, we did several escape rooms, which I don't know if everybody's familiar with an escape room experience. So you're in a room and you have puzzles you have to solve, and they're really great fun. They were working with Royal Caribbean, who made some really cool games and wanted to install them in what had been the wedding chapel. We find this all very ironic. So they were transforming the wedding chapel into an escape room, haha. And so we built a lot of the pieces in the shop and then shipped them to the ships. And then Mary Griswold and I were sent to the ships to paint the existing walls. Then the furniture is installed, and then we came back to do touch-up and any other notes that needed to be done.
So where did you get to do these
projects? Well, the first one that I'm going to show you, so it was really interesting. It was not a cruise. The very first one we did was in the Bahamas, in Freeport, which is actually not that nice a place. And so here we are approaching the shipyard. So dry dock, ships have to go into dry dock every 5 years to get...
Cruise ships do, right?
I don't know, maybe. I think it's all ships is what I was told.
Okay.
Maybe it's more frequent for little ones. I don't know. But they have to go into dry dock to have their hulls repaired. So the cruise lines take this as an opportunity as, hey, we have 30 days downtime or, 4 weeks or 6 weeks of downtime. What can we do? So they then turned this into, let's rehab the ship. So on the ship are thousands of workers, and they do a $170 million renovation in 4 weeks.
So in 4 weeks, they build stuff off the ship in the various vendors, produce work.
They have to gut it. They have to gut everything.
And then it goes to the ship, and they do, in the course of this 4 to 6 weeks, they do Between the stuff that they install and the work on the ship, it's $170 million worth of work in 4 to 6 weeks, which is just kind of mind-boggling.
It's
all
like a
done.
skyscraper on its side, and it is just huge. So this ship is Independence of the Seas. So here we are in the parking lot getting there. And then here's a dry dock. So what they do, this dock actually raises the ship up. So there's a little bitty ship on that one.
That's a little ship in there, but this whole structure
So
takes
the
the ship.
ship goes in. I don't know how they do it. It's magic. These are professionals. They take the water out. The whole thing rises up, and the ship is up in the air. So this is our ship, Independence of the Seas, and there's Mary, and there's a big ramp. Can you show the ramp? So to get to the ship, you have to go up that ramp.
Because you got to remember, usually the water's somewhere around there.
Right.
So, but there's, you got to get up in there. So.
That's a nice view. I will show the person. There's a person in that, down lower, right in there. That's just a lift, so they're like that big. It's tiny. Here's the ramp. That was quite daunting. Didn't ever want to go up and down that again after you haul all your luggage and your tools. Here's our room. So we did stay on the ship, but you can see everything's covered in plastic.
All that on the floor. The furniture is covered in plastic.
Right. Outside our window, this was our view. And that is a crane on rails that goes back and forth, and it hauls sea cans up onto the top deck. This is our hallway. So they're
this
doing.
This is not like 9 to 5 work.
No, this is 24/7. They're outside. They have, I think they pulled up the carpet, and they're doing welding, and they're taking out walls. And this woman sitting here is a fire watcher. There's like 400 fire watchers. Their job is to sit there with water and watch you, make sure you don't start a fire. This is up on the upper deck, and you can see all the sea cans up all around. And the first couple of weeks are all gutting, taking everything off. So now it's dry dock, and so whenever we were working and something would go wrong, people would just look at you and they would say, "It's dry dock." "Oh, you've not been to dry dock before, have you?" It's like, no, haven't. Well, if there's high winds, if there's weather, whatever, even if you are in a dock, they can't necessarily bring your container up onto the ship when you want it. Or they can't bring the container of the people who are doing the work before you have to do your work up onto the deck. So they can't do their work, which means you can't do your work. And actually we did have a problem. There was a leak in the window in the room we were working in. It rained, and it rained the day that they had put leveling cement on the floor, and it ruined the cement. And so then they had to jackhammer all the cement out, and they had to redo the floor and fix the window leak. So we weren't able to work for 2 days, although we were there. So there's some more pictures from up on the upper deck. This is our view from the side. There's more ships in dock. Oh, hi. There's me. And here's...
And Catherine's wearing a hard hat because it's an active work site, so you had hard hat,
steel-toed shoes, gloves, goggles,
steering protection, the full 9 yards for all of that.
And then this is inside in the grand atrium. Everything is a workplace, absolutely everything. And so then the next thing that happened is, we got a flood. So they're opening various systems. It's not like we're flooding and we're going to drown. No, we're just flooding and we're making a mess. So it didn't get to our clothes, so we were lucky, and we had to move to a new room. So then we moved to a new room, and we had a balcony. But nope, you can't go out on the balcony because they're going to resurface it. And not only can you not go out on the balcony, all the balcony furniture is in your room with you, so you have to... So we were very creative, and we arranged it in such a way that we had nice legs sticking up in the air for drying racks for our clothes when we had to hand wash our clothes. So then you come back to your room and you find this little sign on your door, and this is another company saying, oh, we're going to be doing this work in your room. Please put all your stuff in the bathroom. So you can't unpack. You have to put all your stuff in your luggage into the bathroom so that they can get in there and do whatever. What are they? I don't know what they're saying they're doing. They change the carpet, they change the beds, whatever. Then here in one of the elevators, so everybody on the planet is working here. This is what I absolutely loved about it. There are people from every country, and they're all working. And so on this one elevator, it has glass windows in it, and they were saying, this is for people only. And they have a picture of, yes, people, no, equipment. And then they have 4, and it's in like a dozen languages, people translated into a dozen languages, only, exclamation point, translated into a dozen languages because somebody had poked a hole through one of the glass. It's curved glass, takes a lot of time to fix it. So anyhow, here we are up at Johnny Rockets enjoying a drink. Beer was cheap, but you could only drink it there. It's just this whole big crowd of mostly guys. I think there's like 80% men working on the ship. Here we are having lunch or dinner, which was all down in the dining room. They were going to tear out the carpet, so they didn't put plastic down on it, but the chairs would have plastic on it. The windows would be plasticed off because they were going to be scrubbing the outside of the ship. These guys are very aggressive about their food. They want it. They want it now. They don't want to wait. So there's 2 steam table lines. And the food was really interesting. They had food for everybody, so there would always be something for everyone. One day there would be all these, fillets of fish, and then the next day there would be the heads and the tails of the fish. And I passed. And then there would be, and one day I remember getting a plate. It was like, ooh, this looks good. Ooh, this looks good. And I got to the table to sit down, and it was like I had potatoes from around the world. So they had I liked the food a lot. Some of the guys from the shop were like, what do you want? Just burgers and fries? They were not very adventurous, so they weren't as happy. Here's one of the pieces that we built in the shop. So the theme for the escape room is an observatorium, and so there's some sort of kind of steampunky outer space kind of problem you had to solve. Here's the room, and we're just starting. There's Mary putting the first roller down. There's the windows that leaked. So it's an oval room, and it has a oval dome, and the paint technique was a couple different colors, but it was a sponge technique over all of the surfaces. There it is, midway through it. Now, part of the problem is that we got pushed back, so in spite of my plea to not have the carpenters come on their regularly scheduled day, and rather they all came at the same time. So we had to work in the same place at the same time. It was absolute mess. So they're trying to put scenery in while we're painting, and everybody needs to be in the same space at the same time. Here it is done. And so you can see that's like a marble base. It's not really as obvious, but that's marble, but that's all painted faux marble. It's all faux metal, brass and leather. It's not, it's aluminum. And then that's, the windows are actually a light box that light up for this galaxy view. And there's kind of their marketing PR version of it.
So you got to do that. We're gonna jump quickly because we're running out of time. You got to do that in the Bahamas, and then you got to do it in Spain. And Catherine managed to work out the week between when they did the big chunk of the work and the finish up. She and her painting partner Mary got to spend
5 days.
5 days going
touring
around
southern
touring
Spain. Yeah,
So,
that was wonderful.
This was a nice trick.
Right.
For
So
Catherine.
then, recently I've been working on some Disney projects. Now these are actual cruises, so that meant that we had to work overnight because everything's functioning, and we were actually on water, which was a new experience. We hadn't been on ships that were moving before, although you did a little bit. So we left Port Canaveral and went to the Eastern Caribbean for 1 week, and then we went back and we left Port Canaveral towards the Western Caribbean for 1 week, and then we went home, and then we came back 2 weeks later and did the Eastern Caribbean again, because now what we were doing is refurbishing a set for a theatrical production on one of their cruise ships. And they're doing rehearsals during the day, they're using the theater during the day, they're showing movies, they also have other productions that they're running, so it's a completely functioning theater during the day. So we would start at about 10:30 at night and we would work until 8:30 in the morning, and then we would have, like you do at the end of the day, you go home and you want your beer and you want to sit and, look at the sky and then go to bed. So we would do that in the morning. We would have our beer in the morning and have breakfast, and then we would sit on the deck and look out at the water. It was really very pretty, and then we would go to sleep and get up. So our dinner time was when we ate dinner with all the guests, and got to experience some of cruise life. I'm really glad I went this way because I feel like it was demographic research, and I got to kind of watch as opposed to really get involved. And it was interesting. And Disney is, they're a, like you like to say, what is it? They're a theatrical company.
There are cruise lines that are cruise lines that do entertainment.
Right.
Disney is an entertainment company that does cruises.
So
and that's a very different experience for the passenger.
Everybody is part of the show, and in fact, we were told, how to respond to guests if they have questions, and you don't know the answer, so you need to behave in the Disney way. So here, Mary and I, there's our ship over my shoulder, and we went up to the top of some mountain in St. Thomas, I think this is. So we got out a little bit. And then Disney has their own island, Castaway Key. So we got to get off there and have a drink and look at the ship and relax a little bit. But, there was no time to do any excursions or anything. So most of the ports are kind of the same. They all have Diamonds International, Senor Pedro's, and Margaritaville. So they're all kind of the same unless you can get out farther, but we usually had to, I would like to set foot, on this other land and then get back on the ship. We also were able to get cellular service because it was really awful on the ship.
Catherine actually isn't going to show you anything she painted on the ship because
I signed a non-disclosure agreement.
Non-disclosure, so she can't really talk about it. So that's why this is the lovely cruise side of that job, and I think we're going to finish it with the picture.
The interesting thing about working on the ship was working on a moving ship, because you're on the stage and everything is moving. So
imagine you're on a ladder on a moving floor trying to paint
a scenery that's moving, and then some days were better than others, and they go faster at night too. So the waves are bigger, and the theater is in the front of the ship, so all of that is much bouncier, and it was really, there would be these noises. What was that? I remember the first time we went to dock, I heard this noise. I was like, "Is that the L? Wait, no, can't be. What is that noise?" And it was the forward thrusters, and it was like, oh, we must have arrived. We're, because it's just dark. You don't know where you are. And we had come to port. So that was fun. So looking forward to doing some more of that.
And then one of the lovely photos that Catherine took and I got
Sent
on my phone.
You. Well, it was still freezing here in Chicago.
So So I think we're kind of at time. We want to make sure we get some questions from the folks. So thank you for regaling us with some of your tales at sea and what a scenic artist is.
So thanks so much. This is so interesting. And I really related to the sort of fixed cost budget. Like I do research, funded research, same deal. You get paid a certain amount of money, whatever you use up, you used up. But I also had like the non-disclosure stuff. That's also salient in my research world. And it's an interest, and I'm just curious if you can kind of help me think through how to balance your pride as an artist and the need to develop a portfolio and prove what your work is and feel good about this was the right thing to do for this situation versus you've got 3 layers of bosses ahead of you and you've got people who own rights and who have control, and just sort of your personal integrity, your professional integrity, your autonomy versus your accountability as a professional in a clear line of command.
Well, I think Disney's non-disclosure is probably the toughest one. You know, I talk to the marketing director at Chicago Scenic and ask her what I can use, and she said, whatever you want to say about Royal Caribbean is fine, it's open. So mostly what they want is for you to not spill the beans or say something unflattering or whatever before the company is signed off on it, or the client is signed off on it, or before the job is completed. Disney, it's kind of like, you can, when we were on the ship, they were like, you can post photos, but it has to be pictures of anything that any of the guests would see. So they don't want you to be showing things that are, you know, secret or behind the scenes or anything else like that. And I understand it. It's fine. For my portfolio at this stage in my career, it's not really very critical. It's kind of sad. I find it kind of sad that I can't share those pictures. I think what was more, you know, interesting was just the environment of working there, and the same with the Royal Caribbean. It was just the outrageous environment that I didn't, I could maybe have read about it if I'd thought to, but I had no idea about working in it. You know, it was just really fascinating to me, and it was an adventure. It really was just an adventure. I mean, the painting was not the hard part. You know, it was, negotiating the space with the 20 other people who were trying to work in it, and just, it was just novel. So, there's nothing that is so exceptional about the painting that I was doing that, it was nice for Disney. It was definitely nice, and it was good scenic painting, but it's not something that isn't represented somewhere else in my, that quality or that style of work in my portfolio. But I don't know if that answers the question.
Autonomy with the power, like just engage your boss.
So the tension between what we do every day, making the subjective judgments about the art, how that relates to the designer, and how that relates to the people counting the money. So how do we balance that tension?
It's a hard balance, and it's when you're just making constantly, and you're having to assess it all the time. So people come into the paint shop and they go, "Oh, it's so quiet and peaceful here." It's like, it is not peaceful. I am sweating bullets trying to come up with a process that's going to be fast enough. And yeah, I look like I'm standing there for 6 hours doing something that you think is easy, but I'm really, trying to sort all of that out. And I'm trying to make sure that we give the client what they want, because that way the client comes back. And I'm trying to make sure that we do it in a timely manner, because that means I get to come back. I mean, it's, and we don't go under, or we don't lose money or whatever. And I don't really know, so I'm not actually privy to the details of, sometimes we do get how many hours are allotted to this project, which is nice. When I worked at Becker's, he would never want to tell us that because he thought we would use it all. Because, it's like, no, I would like to know so I can not use it all so that I can make it be done, to completion within that amount of time. But he had a hard time letting go of that information.
I think one of the things we do as painters is we take pride in getting it done fast. We want it to look beautiful, but if you can do it in a little less time, that's you take satisfaction in that. I mean, that's just one of the things that's part of the deal. It's like, make it look pretty and, I scored because it came in a day ahead. So,
right.
But it's hard to balance it.
Fascinating. I'm so struck by the physicality of this work, and I just wonder how you guard against injury physically. Do you hold your body in a certain way when you're working on the floor? I mean, I sit at my desk at work all day and I get neck strain and back strain, but I cannot imagine what this work does to you physically.
It is, it's getting harder and harder the longer I do it. The good thing is that there are a lot of repetitive motions, it's true, but everything is different all the time. So yes, I may do this one motion for a full day and I'm exhausted and beat at the end of the day, but tomorrow I hopefully don't have to do that exact same thing. Sometimes you do, but it isn't like working a line, where you have the same physical motion over and over again. I did just graduate from physical therapy for my shoulder because I had some rotator cuff issues, and that was something I did to myself, and then it was impinging on my ability to work. So, and then I did fall off the bucket, as we all know, and that was a workers' comp mistake I made, and I broke my wrist, and but I still worked while I had it in the cast. And that just worked out. So, I mean, it's freelance, so you have to take care of your body because, there's also how often, we didn't talk about that at all, how often do you work? You get a call to work for a day, get a call to work for 2 days, and then you're laid off. So we're laid off just all the time, it's, thank you, that was great. And they don't really care whether you come back or not because they're done. You care, and I mean, it's regular that it's like, okay, I'm done with work. I have nothing for the rest of my life, and I just have faith that somebody will call again, or there are people I call and say, hey, I'm available. But yeah, you need to keep your body in shape to do all that. I mean, I put in about 10,000 or 12,000 steps a day at work. So I wear, and stretches, and yoga is really great, but I never have time to do it.
I'm going to work on this one, and then I'll come to this.
Technology seems to really just come into our lives in many different ways. I'm sure some of the media you use has been advanced. Your actual artistic painting is old school. Driving down the tollway, I see billboards that look like they're sheet printed. Do you see that kind of technology coming in and, I don't want to say replace a part, but
we're dinosaurs. They're able to print seamless goods up to, 16 feet?
Oh, it's bigger than that.
But I think for the Goodman backdrop, it had to go to Germany to be printed.
There's one printing press in Germany that can print like 30-foot wide seamless muslin.
So the only thing that really saves us is the fact that the designers can't decide what they want until it's too late. But and also when you print it, you have to be able to communicate well enough about color, and there's an awful lot of back and forth with a printer to figure out, exactly what you're going to get. There are a fair amount of things that are being printed now. A lot of signs are, on stage, signage on stage, backdrops, all sorts of stuff. Sometimes, not too frequently, will paint on painted or on printed work, but not too often. I personally find it really jarring to see printed scenery. I can spot it. Sometimes it's a scale issue. Sometimes it's a pixel size issue, and so I'm sure that the technology is just going to advance and advance. So it won't be long before they don't need us too much. But that is why I was pointing out the Harry Potter book, thing, because it really is way more fun to be in it than to have a green screen. So a green screen is really cool, but it's not as involving somehow. It's not as experiential. Technology has affected the way we work. It's been going on for centuries. Michelangelo used pounces, but he pushed a pin through all his drawings on paper, and then he would stick his paper up on the ceiling, and then you rub charcoal through all the little holes. Well, we have an electric pounce, so you can pounce really fast, but we still do it for repetitive images. Projectors, we use overhead projectors, and now computer projectors to project images up, so you don't have to spend the time drawing. Also, the way it influences designers is really interesting. So when Xerox was big, people would say, I want the scenery to look as though it was all Xerox. So we got really good at taking paint and turning it into Xerox. Copying your rendering is this Xerox, and so now we have to copy Xerox on this, and we do it. So the technology has really, informed what we paint too. Then pixels, it was really big pixels, so there's like a million little, square brush strokes everywhere. It's just going to keep going, It's fascinating. And I know I did work with Bob Hedberg, was one of the old painters, and when I taught at Loyola, he was a scenic artist there, and he said, I just don't know how you guys do it, because he couldn't paint he just felt like he couldn't do it. He was lying. He could, but it is a real change in the way we have to paint and the kinds of things we have to paint.
Hi, almost your entire talk was on the technical aspects of scenic design. You did mention fooling the audience, which is a basic principle of all the arts, is to create an illusion. But I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about aesthetic or artistic principles in scenic design.
Well, I was really focusing on the scenic artist job that I do, and not so much on my scenic design. So scenic design is really when you work with the director and decide what the aesthetic is going to be and how you come to that conclusion. It is, in theater, it's really driven by what the director is seeing as the reason for doing this production. There are so many influences to what you would choose to do, but as a scenic artist, I don't choose what the aesthetic is. I just choose how to realize it most efficiently for the designer. But that's a whole other conversation.
I think we'll do a couple more questions, and then it'll be end of the talk.
That was great. You're a talented lady. So I have two questions, and I do some woodwork, and I feel I don't do any woodwork that's attached to a wall, because I know somebody's going to destroy it someday. I know somebody's going to destroy it. I do nothing that's attached to a wall.
Great.
And I just wonder how it feels when you do this beautiful stuff, and the play closes in a week. It has to just And then
Tim can answer that one. Bob Hedberg tells a story. So I said Bob Hedberg is one of the old painters. He worked at WGN.
Yeah, Bob Hedberg was a absolutely wonderful painter, talented as it could be. I mean, you would watch him paint and his brushstroke and it'd be like, I'll never be able to do that. And I got to paint with him a few times, and I asked him, how did you get into this business? And we were talking, and he said he learned one thing. He had started, and he was a fairly young painter, and he was working at WGN. This is when television stations did lots of scenery, and he was working on the Bozo show. And he'd finished up painting the stuff for the day, and he was washing his brushes, and he was going to get ready to go to lunch. And they ran in and they said, oh, wait, can you paint this little thing? It was a little prop for Bozo or somebody to hold as a part of the action. He said, sure, I can do that. And he painted it really quickly. And they're like, thanks, great. And they ran it into the studio, and the show started. And he washed out the couple more brushes again, and he walked out the door to go to lunch. And as he was walking out the door, a stagehand had the prop that he had just painted like 15 minutes ago, had been used in the show. The stagehand was tossing it in the dumpster. And Bob said, at that point, he understood what it was all about. So, yeah, it is pretty horrible sometimes. You're like, oh my God, we've done all this work and it's just going to go away. But I don't even really think about it anymore. I mean, do you think about it that much?
There are a few things that we did murals at Marshall Fields. I think it was on the 4th floor in the shoe department, and they've all been painted over. There were some murals that were there from a long time ago that there's like up in the Narcissus room, there was a really nice mural up there that had, was of the Narcissus room fountain, and it was also painted on the wall. It was really beautiful. It got painted beige. It's just sad, but, you know, what are you going to do?
I think actually we're at about time, so I'm going to do a couple of announcements, but thank you, Catherine, for sharing all of this.